The myth that, the window's cracked, hold back $500, we don't want to give it to them. That's not really true.
That is also a good point that you made, Lawrence, that many people have said, oh, you know what, this is wrong in the property, just hold back $2,000 from the purchase price. I said, but where is the provision of the holdback?
Hey everyone, it's Lawrence Mack from Remax Realtron here again with Dheeraj Bhatia from Madison Law. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. Today we wanted to talk about a very important topic. It comes up a lot. And the general scenario goes like this. You like a house, you put in a deposit for a house, the house becomes firm, and so you're going to buy the house, and then maybe a week beforehand, before you actually close, you go visit the house and find out, let's just say the basement's flooded. What do you do then?
So the law is pretty much clear that when an agreement is signed, and usually there is a time difference between the day the agreement is signed and the closing date. So the law is clear that the seller is required to deliver the property in the same condition as it existed on the date of the signing of the agreement.
Right.
So if the basement is flooded, obviously, you have to first inform your lawyer, and the lawyer will give a notice to the seller's lawyer. Mostly, you should negotiate at that time. Either the closing could be extended with the mutual consent of both the parties, or there could be a holdback to cover the cost, or there could be a credit to the buyer. Unfortunately, sometimes the sellers, they think that they are the kings, they are in the driver's seat and they say either it's my way or the highway. We are not going to do anything. The basement was like this even before you signed the contract.
Too bad.
And too bad. So in that case, you must always get an inspection done. So I always suggest that whenever you sign a contract, you must get an inspection done. Even if the contract is not conditional upon inspection, still get an inspection done, because that helps you to create a record. Because the professional inspector is a licensed inspector. Inspector is allowed to take pictures of the property. You would have a record that no, sir, this basement was not flooded at the time we entered into the agreement.
Right.
So once you have that, you can have the seller on the hook. But there is another problem here. In my years of practice of doing real estate transactions, there have been cases in which the buyer has said, oh, we went into the property, basement is a big thing. People have said the stove is not working,
right,
or the washroom faucet is not working.
Yeah, or there's a crack in the window.
Jacuzzi is not working.
Yeah,
so
minor.
Yeah, and I'm upset. This is very important to me. You do not close the transaction. And I explain them with great patience that this is not a title issue. So this is only a minor issue. So we cannot tell the seller that we are not closing the transaction. You will be in breach of the contract.
Yes, we have a contract that this is what's going to happen on this day.
Yes.
And that's not really material.
And I understand that that's very frustrating for a seller. Many sellers, they blame the agents, they blame the lawyers. They say, oh, my agent took so much of commission from me and I'm not getting a property which I wanted, that the mirror should be there uncracked. Or there's a hole in the wall where there was a television and now they have taken off the television, right? Or they say, oh, to the lawyer, oh, we paid you so much, we are paying you so much, why can't you fix this for you? The only thing is, fortunately or unfortunately, your profession and my profession is a civil profession. We can only negotiate, I can only put the seller on the notice. I cannot force them to fix this. We can put them on notice, but we have to close the transaction. In those cases, we can close the transaction under protest upon notice to the seller, and the only recourse for the buyer is to sue them after the closing.
So small claims court or something like
Depending on if it is till the damage is up to $25,000, you have to go to the small claims court, and if the damage is over $25,000, you have to go to the superior court. So that is the thing. However, in some cases, if you can prove that this damage was not existing at the time of the execution of the contract and it occurred later on, then the buyer may refuse to close the transaction if the seller does not agree to fix those issues.
Right.
But beware of that the seller might put you in breach of the contract and it might end up in litigation, which can take a lot of time, energy, resources and money for you to resolve as to which is correct. Because there's a clause in the agreement of purchase and sale which requires that there cannot be any damage to the property after the execution of the contract, and if there is any damage and the seller refuses to fix it, the agreement is null and void.
Right. So at the end of the day, for instance, the buyer, maybe they see some deficiency and they really don't want to close. The recourse is really just to close and then either sue them, or I guess they could try not to close and then they get sued back for a breach, and then it just gets really messy at that point, right?
Yeah, so as I said, again, just to clarify that a buyer may not close only if the deficiencies are major. They are major structural or damage to the property, not just because the basement is flooded or there's some window that is cracked or whatever, and the onus is upon the buyer to prove that it was not there at the time the buyer entered into the agreement of purchase and sale. So that's why I say that the buyer must take pictures with the permission of the seller or must get an inspection done at the time of the signing of the contract.
So the myth that the window's cracked, hold back $500, we don't want to give it to them, that's not really true.
That is also a good point that you made, Lawrence, that many people have said, oh, you know what, this is wrong in the property, just hold back $2,000 from the purchase price. I said, but where is the provision of the hold back? Unless and until the agreement clearly allows me to hold back, I cannot arbitrarily hold back.
You can't just change the agreement. You've already agreed on the agreement.
Yes, so we cannot do that. Yes, we can ask the seller, and in some cases, if the seller is reasonable and the seller's lawyer is reasonable, backed by solid evidence on behalf of the buyer, and we tell them that this was the situation and here's their thing, and then the close, say for example it is on the closing date, we close the transaction, the seller's lawyer takes instructions from the seller, and the seller would say, you know what, I will hold back for $5,000 for a period of 30 days or 6 months depending on nature of the damage.
And I'll fix the deck or whatever it was.
We'll fix the deck, or we'll give you a credit after the closing.
I mean, I do say that a lot to my clients too. At the end of the day, the buyer wants to buy the house and the seller wants to sell the house. It's not really about fighting to see if who's right and whether you can, at the end of the day, if everyone is mostly cooperative, right, within reason and to be fair, right? I mean, that's really the goal. The seller wants to sell so they can go somewhere else, and the buyer wants to move into the house.
Absolutely. You have to be reasonable. The seller should be reasonable. The buyer should be reasonable. There are some buyers who are very picky. They do not want to say, for example, there was a small something, a painting was fixed on the wall and there's a small hole. They want the seller to fix that hole unless otherwise I'm not closing. That's unreasonable. At the same time, the seller should say, if there is something which has changed, I will fix it, or there could be a small credit to the buyer at the time of the closing.
Well, there you have it. It's not as easy as just saying, hold back $50, or we don't want to close. That's really not the best way to do it. But make sure you have a good representation, such as Dheeraj here, so that he can help you guide you through the process.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time.
Next time. Thank you.
All right.